While the streets of D.C. were filled with pro-life Americans this weekend, we also saw our fair share of pro-abortion protesters decrying the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. A self-described women's march took place in the city between Union Station and the U.S. Supreme Court. Other similar events were held across the country. The theme of one event in New York was "1 year without Roe. Take your fury back into the streets." One pro-abortion woman who was picketing in front of the Supreme Court said she feels like we live in a, quote, third world country because of the overturn of Roe. We're joined now by Dr. Carrie Gress. She's the editor of Theology of Home and an author. Carrie is also a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center and a scholar at the Catholic University of America's Institute for Human Ecology. Carrie, thank you so much for joining me today. You have a new book coming out in August. It's called The End of Woman: How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us. An interesting title, to be sure. And the women in these pro-abortion crowds last weekend, they claimed that they're feminists, but we know that their position on abortion wounds women so deeply. So talk to me about how you address that in this new book.
Yeah, well, I think it's a huge question. It's one that we've been really grappling with for about 50 years now. But the fundamental issue, and feminism really started with this question, was how do we help women? Which of course is a big question. But the way they wanted to answer it was by making women a lot more like men than women. And so abortion ends up becoming really just vital and essential for kind of working within that narrative. And this is one of the reasons why they fight for abortion so much, because abortion is really what they believe levels the playing field between men and women, frees women up from what's been called the drudgery of raising children. And so it just feels incredibly important to them as a movement. This is why they're fighting so hard for it.
Sure.
Now, of course, that's creates all kinds of problems across the board when people have that kind of understanding of what abortion is and what it actually does to our children and our families and our homes and our general lives.
Right. And given that the direction the feminist movement has gone in, do you believe the solution is reinventing that feminist movement, or do we need to leave it behind altogether? What's the path forward?
Yeah, I think that's a great question and a really challenging one, because there's so many people that have done great work in feminism that I agree with, but I think it's become an incredibly damaged term. Nobody really knows what anybody means by it. It's very vague, and I think we're leading people into all kinds of intellectual confusion by continuing to use it, especially when you start looking at the roots of it. Even the first wave, that's something that I cover in my first book that I didn't cover in previous books. So I think that is actually a much healthier way to move forward, is to just drop it all together and all the baggage that's associated with it, that usually has the form of the occult or free love or this idea of smashing the patriarchy. So there's a lot that we're freed from if we find new language to talk about being pro-woman.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. And Carrie, chants from this weekend's Women's March, so-called Women's March, included things like "abortion is freedom." Talk to me about how that's such a mistaken notion of freedom.
Right. Well, I mean, again, around the 1900s, you had this shift in the rhetoric about motherhood. And it's really remarkable to see how frequently the word drudgery is used. And we really view it as a kind of enslavement, because this is what we've been told for 100 years. For really 50 years, we haven't said anything good about motherhood. And so it feels like it's something enslaving when that's what we've been told for so long. And that's how we have to be empowered, by being free from it. So that's the general push of it, and why we're seeing that rallying cry, and why women, see this as such an important issue.
It's such a tragedy that it's looked at as a burden. And Carrie, you wrote a book some time ago titled "The Anti-Mary Exposed: Rescuing the Culture from Toxic Femininity." And you talked about some of this in that book. You explain there that Mary is really the antidote to all of the problems that we see with modern feminism. So how can we as women imitate our Blessed Mother in this increasingly anti-Mary, anti-woman culture?
Yeah. Well, I think the big thing is really to first figure out who she is. I think so many of us think of her, or can think of her, in very saccharine terms and very superficial terms. But the reality is that what she is, she's the Mother of God, and she's so humble and imitated him And that's really where we understand how happiness comes about, is in the imitation of Christ and the humbling of ourselves and serving others. And this is the remarkable thing about what we're seeing with feminism, is it's not serving others, it's serving self by and large. The focus comes upon ourselves, and we know that's absolutely a recipe for being miserable, being stuck in sort of this narcissistic whirlpool. So Our Lady offers us a way out of that by saying, go to my son, and saying, these are the virtues and the values that Christianity has espoused for 2,000 years, and there really have been very few things that have supported and helped women better than the church throughout history. No other religion can claim that the way that the Catholic Church has. So I think we have all the answers that we need, and it's just a matter of sort of breaking free from the confusion that we've been offering women for over 200 years about what it means to be woman and pro-woman.
Right, right. Well, I appreciate that insight so much, and I'm so grateful that you were able to join us this week. Thanks again, Dr. Carrie Gress.
Thanks so much for having me.